Regularly scheduled Tuesday, February 12, 2019 Shelburne Selectboard meeting, which I call to order. The first item is to approve the agenda. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mary, seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, the ayes have it. Colleen is not present to vote. She is making the effort to be here tonight. The next item is to approve the Select Board meeting minutes of January 29.
Move to approve the minutes for January 29th, 2019.
Jamie moves approval.
Second.
Mary seconds. Any discussion?
The only comment I had is it says agenda on the top, so we should just fix
Strike agenda.
for the
Thank you.
record. And I think it was a special meeting,
Yes.
so we should make a note of that
Got
as
it.
well.
Thank you.
Otherwise, you're doing really, you're going to earn yourself a
are.
permanent job here with.
Double duty.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Any discussion? Any other comments?
None. I had none.
They look great.
I missed those.
Josh?
No.
No. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those disapproving, nay. The ayes have it. And again, Colleen not voting. The next item are public comments, the first of which is on the library. Ruth is with us to make those.
There. Okay, so I wrote down a couple things. So we went today and toured around in Town Hall, and they're beginning to install the new mechanicals. There's some equipment in, some ductwork in. There'll be more coming in over the next couple weeks, so that's pretty exciting. They won't let me go up on the roof. It's only 60% complete, all the way up to the membrane, so that should be done pretty quickly in the next couple weeks. And starting, they thought maybe tomorrow, but I think it's going to be Thursday because of the snow. They're going to start finishing off the concrete work. So the inside floors are actually concrete, and they will be pouring them now, starting with the attic, and then the second floor, and then the ground level. And that actually should be interesting because they pour it a little differently because it's going into the building, so it comes out a tube, and they actually drag the tube around instead of moving the truck. So that could be a fun thing. Push the snow aside, put in some concrete. So other than that, just moving right along.
Thanks,
Okay.
Ruth.
The photos
All right,
look great on the
thanks.
Facebook page.
Oh,
so
I know, the
keep those
photos are-
coming.
I love the
Yeah,
photos.
so Kathy coming up a
Yeah.
ladder.
Yeah, I haven't gone
Good to
up
see
that
people in
ladder.
those.
Yeah, yeah, that's a scary ladder.
Thank you much, Ruth. Any other public comments? Hearing none, seeing no hands. The next item is Select Board comments. Josh, do you want to lead?
Sure. Just I'm amazed at all of you who have made the effort to, drive through the snow to get here tonight. And for those watching, we're pretty envious of you to be able to do that.
Thanks. Mary?
I have no comments this evening. Thank you.
Jamie?
I'm not sure if Lee is going to mention this, but I will. There's a candidate forum next Tuesday night if people are interested. So come one, come all. Should be a good hour plus. Chance to ask questions and provide comments for the candidates.
And that leads to my comment, which is to welcome Mike Ashu, who is running for the position, and other guests. The next item is the town manager report.
Thank you. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our crews and dispatchers who are likely going to be very busy all night long tonight. Be safe when you head out home for sure. Regional dispatch update. That group of municipalities continues to meet. They have hired a consultant to help them continue moving things forward. At this point, it appears that Milton has chosen to pull out from the project. They are going to go to Grand Isle. They've been dispatched out of Colchester for a number of years in partnership. So that's put a little bit of a tweak in that project. Things are still moving forward, not rapidly, but I think to a point where they feel reasonably satisfied. There's no clear date by which they might be operational. Apparently they decided today that if and when they are up and running, they would choose to hire dispatchers from their own member municipalities that currently run their own dispatch operations. So we'll stay informed. I'll try to make meetings when I can, and certainly monitoring the situation for benefit of us all. I'd like to thank those who worked very hard to get the town report completed. That's at the publishers at this point, and that will be available for distribution soon. The town meeting warning has been posted and will be published in the paper on Thursday the 21st. So things are moving along in that regard. And just wanted to let folks know that Fire and Rescue will be hosting an informational forum about the prospective property matter. That'll be here on Monday evening, the 18th at 7 p.m.
Oh, great.
And they're, as you know, they're taking the lead on informational materials. There's an FAQ document that's been finished as of today. I've sent it to you folks, and it'll be available for public review.
It's 7 or 6, Lee, on the 18th?
That'll be 7 p.m. on Monday, the 18th.
Thanks.
And the forum's the next night, also at 7.
Correct, 7.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. The next item is to consider application for appointment to an alternate seat on the Ethics Committee. Kate Cross has submitted application, and we should probably give a brief explanation of how we're treating all appointments, because hers presumably would go to April 120.
Well, this would be to fill an alternate seat that's presently vacant, so it could be a full 3-year term for that position.
Oh, okay.
The present chair of the committee is very fine with her application. I think she'd be a great candidate.
Are you here?
Kate's here, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Hey, Kate.
I don't know if you have what I gave to Lee, but I'll give you each.
We actually
We do.
Yes, we read it,
Okay.
yes, thanks, Kate.
So I guess the big question is, why would I want to do this?
We're all very interested to hear.
I look at it as an opportunity to serve and ensure the democratic process is open and fair here in Shelburne. I was recently elected JP primarily to be able to work to carry out the election process and certify the fairness of the right to vote. That was my impetus for putting my name in that hat. I'm a dedicated member of the Shelburne community, and I volunteer a lot at the school. Through the school board, I've done the community budget liaison for the past 2 years. And I also do volunteer in town government as it comes up. Last year I ran the Green Up Day initiative. So, and I also think having somebody, and I think Lee and I talked about this, I guess he's not here, that having somebody from a different strata of Shelburne, it would be ideal, because I have 2 kids in school here, I'm part of the school community, and I also bring more gender equity to the group that is predominantly male. So, any questions for me?
Thanks for putting your hat in the ring, Kate. It's really,
Yeah.
we rely on volunteers to run our little town in very large measure.
Yeah.
Folks like you, we really depend on to come and help out, and appreciate your application.
Thanks.
So we have Pete, who's still an alternate, right? On the committee, Kate
Yes.
would be the second, and this is for a term
It could be for a full
3 years.
3-year term.
ending in April
22.
22, right.
Okay.
Because it could effectively start now or April 1.
right.
and-
That's fine with me. I mean, we'll keep
Sure.
it separate from the omnibus.
Right.
Yeah. Any questions for us?
No.
No. Okay. Move to appoint Kate Cross as an alternate to the Ethics Committee for a term beginning this evening and ending April 1st, 2022.
Moved by Jamie,
Second?
seconded by Mary. Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, guys.
Next item is to consider approval of a 1-year loan with National Bank of Middlebury in the amount of $20,000 at a specified interest rate to refinance the purchase of a highway department truck purchased in 2015. Do we need Peter to add information, or?
Peter is here.
Similar to other equipment loans, the way we financed this truck, we purchased in 2015. At that time, we took out a loan for $100,000 for it. It's a one-year note, so what we've been doing is we pay down a portion of the principal each year, renew the balance. You're probably familiar with the drill when we've gone through these before. So now the loan is down to $40,000, so we'll be paying down $20,000 this week and renewing the balance of $20,000 for one more year. At that point, we'll pay off and the truck will be fully paid for. The interest rate is 2.31%, and the loan is for $20,000.
Thank you, Peter.
I'd move to approve a one-year loan with the National Bank of Middlebury in the amount of $20,000 at the interest rate of 2.31% to refinance the purchase of a highway department truck, which was purchased in 2015.
Moved by Mary, seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Peter. The next
So,
item
There are,
is,
sorry, 3 places to sign, if I might send that around.
the next item is to appoint Lee Crone and Colleen Haig as authorized representatives to act on behalf of the town relating to its loan from the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank 2018 Series 2 bond. That is specific to the town center and library loan.
We actually executed a similar document a few months ago when Lee was interim manager, but we figured we should probably redo it with Lee as town manager. The way this project works is we did take out a $2 million bond initially for the town center, the library, town hall project. In order to draw funds from that loan, we need to submit requests to the bond bank as we pay expenses for the project, and we basically get reimbursed as we go along. So the bond bank requires that we have specified individuals that can request the drawdown of funds. And those typically are the treasurer and town manager. So this document basically will just list Colleen Haig, our treasurer, and Lee Crone, town manager, as authorized individuals who can draw down, submit requests to draw funds down for the bond.
Questions, discussion?
Move to appoint Lee Crone and Colleen Haig as authorized representatives to act on behalf of the town in connection with the loan from the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank 2018 Series 2 bond for purposes of the town center and library loan.
And
Second?
the second, seconded by Mary. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The next item is the town plan public hearing. This is the second of the two. Do you want to?
Yeah, and if you could please sign that one other document when you're a moment.
We're moving right along with it.
So as everyone knows, the town plan has been worked on at great length by the Planning Commission and staff. Selectboard has held several informal discussions about it and held the first of the 2 statutorily required public hearings on the proposed plan. Tonight would be the second of those hearings. And if it is your will, you can eventually close the hearing and consider adopting the proposed plan. And I believe Dean is here, Jason might be here.
Jason is not here. I will attempt to answer any questions in his place, if there are any.
I feel like we fully vetted it, the plan, having each of us read a couple of chapters, having had a hearing and some presentations. So I'm prepared to move to approve the town plan unless there's more discussion from the board or the public.
I'm comfortable as well.
I am too, but we want to be sure if anybody here has a question about it or wants to make a comment. Hi, this is Sar.
I was just curious as to, generally speaking, what's different between this plan and the previous plans? Is there a philosophical difference, or is there a goal difference or anything like that?
I'll take a stab if you want.
Dean, do you want to respond?
There are several differences if you were to count every little change. The major differences between the current plan and the proposed plan, hi Jason, is the design of the document. But that's really the style over the substance. The sections of the plan that got the most attention include the energy section, which was expanded because of the desire of the Planning Commission for the next town plan to have an elevated status that would give the town more say in the public utility commission hearings. And there was a fair amount of discussion of the future land use section and the natural resources section. I would say that the changes that are included in the text are along a progression, not really changing direction. Since there are some people from the Natural Resources Committee who are very involved, maybe they would want to comment. I don't know, Jason, now that you're here, the question is, what are the major changes in the document? The future land use map, which is one of the places that people look when they look at a plan to see what it changes, is different primarily in that the conservation areas that have been in the past shown on separate maps have been moved into the future land use map.
And is it the same now, effectively?
Is it the same? Well,
Just they've got two layers on a map instead of.
not entirely.
Okay.
So to answer your question fully, we could do a side by side, but the overall pattern of land use that's proposed in the plan is essentially the same, which is to say that the village area of the town is intended to remain the core, the center of commercial and social activity. Beyond the village area and making up the rest of the sewer service area is to be developed for both residential and commercial purposes. And the philosophy regarding the area beyond the sewer service district has been pretty consistent, which is to say that people in Shelburne want the rural parts of the town to remain rural insofar as it's possible. So that hasn't changed in the main. There are proposed changes to policies. So there are goals, objectives, and recommended actions that are included in the plan. That's generally the format throughout. Again, to answer your question specifically, we'd have to do a side by side.
Okay.
But it's the same general direction. I would say that in the case of natural resources, there's perhaps more intensity or it's stronger language than the last iteration of the plan about protection of resources.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me,
You want to take the mic and let us know who?
it sounds to me, and I don't want to belabor this. I
No,
know
that's
Phyllis
okay.
will.
You need to let the TV audience know,
Okay.
Mrs. Sarr, who you are.
I'm Amy Sarr. I live on Harbor Road. I'm in the rural district. I guess what I'm curious about is the philosophy behind the plan or the goals are maintaining rural nature development in the center. But the regulations and the requirements that are actually laid out are getting more and more severe, I believe.
I think the contrary is true, and if you stay around and listen to the,
Natural resources?
no, if you listen to what we're gonna go into shortly for changes to,
Yeah, I know,
Zoning.
but that's not really, that's to my point in a way.
how so?
Anyway, I find it a little bit disturbing that the trend is always to more regulation. And because you never know how expensive it is for the general populace to deal with all these things.
Do you have any examples of that?
Well, I can't give you an example right now, but even the regulation that you're going to talk about, the zoning change, that is going to require substantially more time and effort to go through that process. Anyway,
Thank you. Is there, Jason, do you want to respond at all? The original question was, how does this year's compare to the plan that has succeeded? In general, very general terms.
Aside from what's been reported in the last couple of times we've done this, Yeah,
are there more restrictions?
I don't even know how to answer that question. There are, well, the plan itself doesn't make restrictions. Like, the plan itself is a guiding document. The regulations are separate, which is what you're talking about. I'm just not sure how quite to answer.
Well, is it leading to more regulation? I think it was you who said that.
And you need to have a mic. If you're Amy, sorry.
Yeah.
You said it was more aggressive or more intense, the natural resources.
And this is one of the reasons why I was suggesting that maybe some of the members of the Natural Resources Committee who are pretty involved in this would care to address your point. But yes, there is language in the Natural Resources section that recommends that certain regulations be adopted. Yes, that's true. The plan in the past has done the same thing. This version of the plan does more of it than the last version.
Susan Meganberg.
So you want to identify yourself?
Susan Meganberg. I'm a member of the Natural Resources and Conservation Committee. And to that point of regulations, as Jason said, it's a guiding document, not a regulatory document. And I would say not necessarily stronger regulations were in our minds. I worked on some of the language in the Natural Resources section, but I would say smarter regulations in the sense of thinking forward what we can do for example, water quality protection so that we don't further impair waterways and end up with a big bill to pay to clean up a mess. So it's just as an example of what was in my mind when I crafted some of the language, just trying to be more forward thinking and a little smarter in where we focus our attention.
Thanks, Susan. Amy, or?
Just one more question, I'm sorry. Did you get a study, for instance, in all these different things on the non-point source of pollution from Shelburne?
So our committee collaborates with the Lewis Creek Association, which does volunteer water sampling along the La Platte River, McCabe's Brook, and other streams. So we get regular updates from them on the status of water quality.
But the source?
The sources of pollution? Well, yeah, generally those are known for point and non-point pollution.
Okay? All set?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Jamie moves.
Second.
Josh seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to adopt the Town of Shelburne Comprehensive Plan as presented.
Jamie so moves. Josh seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. Congratulations, Jason. Thank you,
Congrats.
Dean. A lot of people involved.
Of course, thank you to the entire Planning Commission, the Natural Resources Commission, all the subcommittees that have been involved with this, and all the other stakeholders. So it's a huge effort, and I know it's a number of years of your lives, so the town thanks you.
Years worth. We can't be appreciative enough.
And
for
you
that.
only have to wait 8 years to do it again.
That's right.
Or sooner.
Or sooner if you want.
Could be sooner.
Thank you again. We greatly appreciate the effort. The next item is a public hearing on proposed zoning amendments as approved by the Planning Commission. Do you want to introduce those, Lee, or do you want to have?
I will defer to Dean and Jason. We have two separate proposals that were both warned for this evening for purposes of efficiency, and I'll be glad to let them explain what those proposed changes are.
Thanks. Thanks, Colleen. It's a lot of effort to get here, we know.
I have a short series of slides that I can share with the board. You've had the material for a while. The process to date has had the development of, or seen the development of 2 separately drafted proposals that came about as a result of property owner inquiries or requests, or in one case, repeated requests, as well as recommendations of committees. The Planning Commission has held hearings on the 2 separate proposals back on October 25th and January 10. And they forwarded those the day after the hearings in each of those cases, and they were received by the Select Board on 2 different dates, but as Lee said, for efficiency, they were combined. As far as the first proposal, it would modify development potential for certain properties, and this is, I believe, the issue that's of concern to Mrs. Saar, that right now aren't subdividable. So several years ago, the idea was included in the regulations that said essentially to subdivide land, we look at the land area after we've taken out wetlands, slopes, and floodplains. So one impact of that is that if you have a 10-acre lot that has 2 acres of wetland, you, for zoning purposes, have a 9-acre lot. And 9 is not 2 times 5, so it's not subdividable. So what would happen under this proposal is that if we're looking at lots that are less than 15 acres, we just look at the total area. So it's affecting the development potential of those lots in Shelburne that are less than 15 acres in size. And it would basically mean where we tell them today you cannot subdivide, we would tell them 21 days from now you have the possibility of subdividing. Now, in addition to that increase in development potential, there would be an offsetting change that would subject more development to review as a plan unit development. So development in Shelburne, when it involves splitting land, will require review under the subdivision regulations and sometimes under regulations called the plan unit development. What would happen as a result of this change is that all subdivisions in the rural district would be considered PUDs. So they would all have to go through the PUD review process. Right now, only some do when the subdivision would create 6 or more lots. In the future, if this is adopted, the creation of 2 or more lots would be subject to PUD review. There are some kind of related technical changes that make it clear to someone who's picking up the zoning regs that the size is based on this change. As I said, that's what the next bullet point is about. And then there's a change in the amount of open space that's required as part of a PUD. Right now, the PUD open space requirement is 33%. And in the past, it's been as high as 50%. And the proposal that's being advanced would increase the open space area requirement to 60%. And then the last change is that it would reduce the size of what we call the periphery buffer. It's basically like an additional setback on top of the other setbacks that isolates or buffers a PUD from the surrounding area. So that's the first proposal. And like I say in lay terms, it means if you've got a parcel less than 15 acres, you get a break. On the other hand, you have more review, and then there's this change in the PUD buffer. Any questions? Right.
Can you go back one slide? real
Sure.
quick?
So the change in the
Oh, by
buffer
33%.
from 75 to 50 is the 33% reduction in the
Okay,
buffer size.
Should we talk about this one first and then pick up the second, or
Well,
are
you
folks
may,
going to get
my
turned
advice
around?
would be to maybe get through the second one because there may be less controversy involving the second. I wish that I had done these slides the other way around.
Which one is the second?
Yeah, I was just suggesting so we don't muddy the waters between the two proposals, but go ahead.
Well, the PUD proposal was the first one advanced to you, and it's the
Right.
one that I've just described. And it's the one that I think will generate much more discussion of the two. Okay, so the second proposal is something very similar to what members of the board who were around a year or so ago saw. And it changes the part of the regs that come into play when someone has a property and a building on that property doesn't meet the current standards. So in other words, if a building is too close to the front if it encroaches on the front yard setback or on the side yard setback, it's considered non-conforming. And in the past, the Select Board, upon recommendation of the Planning Commission, made a change that loosened those requirements, made them more flexible, so to speak. And this is a proposal that would do some more of that kind of adjustment. Before anybody gets an approval, ultimately for a change, it goes to the Development Review Board. It's called a conditional use. And as part of conditional use, the board is looking at impacts on community facilities, character of the area. Those are the things that typically get considered with conditional use. So in lay terms, it would make the rural district non-conforming language a bit more like what we see in the mixed use district, where they're pretty generous. And the effect is that if you have a building that's close to a property line, you could expand that. You can't get any closer to the property line, but you could expand it. But there's a cap. You couldn't double the size of the building, but you could increase it by 25%. Why this is maybe familiar to some of you is that it tweaks something that happened last year, or actually in early 2017, when Quinniasca was looking to expand their clubhouse and the zoning regulations did not allow it. What happens under this proposal is that if you have a small lot, you can get some of those benefits that under the earlier proposal really just applied to Quinniasca. And just to graphically represent, if you're a bird and you're flying over, let's say, Spear Street, and you're looking down and you see the gray road passing left to right beneath, that's what the Quinniasca situation was like. Their clubhouse was entirely in front of a line here, and that's a non-complying structure, and you couldn't expand it. And so the regulations were changed to say you could, or you could even change if it was partially within the setback. That was something that those changes, and we did that just by tweaking some of the language in the bylaws. What we weren't smart enough to think about at the time was a smaller lot that not only is too close to the road, but is too close to the side. Because in the case of Quinniasca, they had a very large parcel, nowhere near the side yards. It wasn't felt at the time that it was necessary to give that flexibility on the sides. But having had a chance to think about it, it seemed sensible to also allow it to be relaxed on the sides. And the other aspect of this that we weren't smart enough when the language was developed was we didn't consider a situation where a lot was on a road, but it wasn't a public highway. And we had drafted the earlier changes to make reference to the public highway. And the feeling is that it's not necessary to make reference to a public highway. So this proposal would say that someone in this situation could also apply to the DRB for relief using the conditional use process. That's it effectively. I can show you the specific text if people are interested, but I'm not sure that that's where you want to drill down. And anything else, Jason, or any other?
No. Yeah, I was just going to say again that the second one had more to do with a tweak on something that was approved previously just because of the reference to the road. So it was basically taking away a reference to the road so that other properties in a similar situation could get that same benefit.
Of that change, yeah.
Lee, have any further comment? Any comment?
No, thank you.
Are there any comments, questions?
Any of them?
I'm sorry, Amy?
Are you asking for any of them or the third one?
I think you can address anything that you've heard that's being proposed.
Okay, it sounds to me, and
You need to announce yourself again, I'm
Amy
sorry.
Sarr, Harbor Road. It sounds to me as if there are three parts to the proposal. One is for lots that are less than 15 acres, allows them to be subdivided even if they don't have developable space. Then there's the small lots where there's some lenience in the various setbacks, is that correct? And then the third is to change the regulating system for all people wanting to subdivide and making it a more extensive kind of review. Is that characteristic? Meaning everybody goes under the PUD?
Is
I
that a
don't
fair
think that's-
summary?
Yeah, that's what they were saying.
Everybody in the rural
Well, I think
district
you-
that's less
I think you
than,
asked the question.
No, even more than 15.
well, that's always been the case.
Jason, do you want to jump in, or?
Could you qualify that?
Well, I don't, in one of our discussions that we had, it seemed, well, what was going to happen is that the approvals for divisions of lots of 15 acres or less would allow you to have a 5-acre lot in the rural district that didn't necessarily have the same definition as a developable land. So, but as I understand it, they're taking all the regulations for everything bigger than 15 subdivisions, and they're proposing that should go under the PUC. Or there is no, in other words, everybody gets a break except for people above 15.
I don't think that's right.
Well, you told me that you have to go through a more extensive process than you have currently.
I can take one crack at this, Jason.
Yeah,
Probably
please
better.
do, Dean. Yeah.
So, it's really two proposals, the setback proposal that I described secondly, and the initial proposal that affects the rural district. And the thing that you have to keep in mind is that for a number of years, a particular property owner who was in the situation that I described, their lot is greater than 10 acres, absolutely, but it's less than 10 acres when you net out those other areas.
Yes.
Okay, so they came to the planning commission once and they'd said, we'd like to have you change the regulations so we can subdivide. And the planning commission didn't agree. They went away. They came back again and they asked, we'd like you to consider this again and change the regulations. And the planning commission talked about it, considered it, and again, did not change it. They came back a third time and asked, we still would like you to change it. And each time the planning commission looked at this several different ways, and this particular time, they came up with a solution of sorts. And the solution was, we as a planning commission, they as a planning commission, could contemplate giving the ability to someone in their situation, but they could only consider giving that ability if it was offset by something. There wasn't a consensus that simply excluding lots 15 acres or less from review was the way to go. They had already rejected that idea a couple of times. So the only condition that the Planning Commission was comfortable as a body moving forward with this idea of allowing someone with a lot that didn't have enough developable area was to affect some other policies that have been discussed a long time. And in fact, the comprehensive plan that was just adopted moments ago has, it has language in it that says that PUDs should be applied to all the subdivisions in the rural district and the conservation district.
Yes.
But if, I would just say again, that's not a new idea. It's an idea that has been promoted for many, many years.
It's not the question of whether it's a new idea. It's the question of, this is Amy Sarr again. It's a question of whether or not there is a section of the properties in the rural district, namely those who have developable land sufficient to make it into 2 lots currently, are suddenly being told they have to go to get in a more extensive review. And to me, that seems like everybody else is getting a benefit, but they are definitely getting a negative.
Well, there are always winners and losers.
Well, yeah, I
in
know,
these
but I am totally
situations.
against
So
it. you're discriminating against certain people.
Well, the proposal is, as Dean mentioned, it's a compromise position that's putting forward, it's loosening the zoning restrictions on one
For
hand
certain people.
and tightening on
For
another
certain
hand.
people. And then it's tightening
Well,
the control.
for certain parcels, not people.
Well, for certain parcels, but the parcels that aren't covered by this are suddenly going to have a much more extensive review. And we all know how long it takes to get through the PUD or whatever it is. It is extensive and very invasive. So, to me, this is a stealth way of establishing something that may have been talked about before, and wrapping that up with rules that allow certain people to do more development than they did before. So I don't have any problem with people getting to subdivide with the definitions slightly loosened, but I do object to having the stealth establishment of getting the review process for the people who currently have it.
Yeah, I think, Amy, your characterization of this process and intent, since you've applied it to, in both cases, as stealth, is unfortunate, unacceptable, and does a great disservice to the number of people who've been involved in this process virtually nonstop in public for now 2.5 months. This is, if you let me finish, this is the very last 11th hour meeting on these proposals, and we simply couldn't let rest your characterization of anything about it as stealth. So I would ask you to correct that if you're willing, and if not, understand that that's rude and unacceptable.
Well, I'm certainly not trying to be
Yeah.
rude. And I don't think anybody's in the back of their mind trying to make things worse for certain people. It's just that the desire to make the process universal and making it a little bit cleaner, so to speak, and then pushing it into a review process that's more extensive is something that needs or needed to be put front and center for all those who are now going to have a worse situation.
Well, we appreciate your points of view.
certainly don't
These are
need to
matters
insult.
that are subject to amendment at all times, so we'll certainly give it some consideration, and we appreciate the degree to which you've delved into it.
I-
ask a
Yeah.
question? I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay, no, that's,
And I just don't understand this part of it. Jamie, you said there's winners and there's losers in every deal. And Dean, you said that in order for the Planning Commission as a body to feel comfortable with this new subdivision ability for parcels under 15 acres, that they wanted something else in return. Where's the connection between what they were allowing versus now what they're expecting? I don't understand the connection. I don't understand why it's like what's the compromise?
I mean,
Well, really, what I'm hearing, and just to comment on things, these are very open deliberations, and this happened over a period of time, and we do welcome the public, and we really encourage that. In this particular case, there was a lot of discussion around it, and there were ideas floated that would have helped the situation that Dean referenced, but the commission didn't want to pass that. There wasn't a majority enough to do that. So we deliberated publicly again for different ways that we could accommodate this, and this was the way it came out. So I say this often on the commission, that you can't please all the people all the time. I recognize that. but that's part of the deliberative process and seeking public input and going through the process.
This is Amy Sarr again. My question is, what is it that they were thinking when they decided that they needed to make it a more extensive review for the above 15? Because obviously they think something has gone wrong
Right, and
with the existing process.
I don't know that I could recount the hours that were spent
Well,
on
I
those
know,
discussions.
I'm
but-
not saying that they came
Right.
up with, I'm not even sure they necessarily thought of it from our point of view.
Of course we did, because we're all residents, and many of us live in the rural area. So, I mean, we really do, and as a matter of fact, there is an opening on the Planning Commission if anybody's interested. So, we are in this position where we are also residents, and
Yes.
we do consider this, and often we'll use our own examples that we know of to say, okay, so here's my situation, I have X number of acres, and I'm in the rural area, and if I wanted to do this, what would that look like? And so we go through these different examples, and this is where the debate brought us, which again was very public.
Yeah, I mean, can I weigh in too?
Yeah.
Because I'm very familiar with the request that this stems from. And, this is, as Dean mentioned, it's a discussion that the commission has had for many years with a proposal that they could never quite get comfortable with. And what we're being asked to review here is a new proposal, a compromise position in some ways that addresses the rural district. So they're trying to balance one piece of this, which is loosening up the zoning restrictions, with another, which is a little bit more scrutiny over the district generally
But,
for subdivisions.
okay.
So that's sort of it in a nutshell.
But the benefit to the people with 15 acres or less is being sort of passed with the assumption that they have to go through a more extensive review. But the people who originally had a different review process,
Are being swept up.
yeah,
Any-
because it's neater, I
It's fair
think.
for any zoning change to a district, that happens.
Well, it may
That there are
happen.
always going to be people affected by it if you're making a change on a district-wide basis.
Well, that's
You
why
may or
I
may not
asked
be
what the
affected.
purpose of it was. Was
Well-
there a purpose of originally trying to get everybody under the PUC?
Well,
No,
one,
that wasn't the generating purpose, as Dean described. Sorry to interrupt.
no, it's fine. I mean, I would add, as part of the zoning change proposal, the commission needs to prepare what they call a bylaw change report. That's in our package, and that report actually articulates all the reasons why this change is consistent with the town plan. So the why
So,
behind
in
it
other words,
is,
you're changing the regulations for all people with acreage over the 15.
well, you're changing it for anyone in the rural district that
No,
wants to
well,
subdivide
You're
property.
letting some people have a little bit more flexibility, and you're making it more extensive for those who aren't in that category. I appreciate you've been through a lot of things. I was not aware of this, and I don't know whether I wasn't around, and I apologize. But if what you're telling me is all this work's been done,
Yeah.
and there's no way of stopping it?
You shouldn't apologize, first of all. It's a reasonable comment and a
And-
fair
and so
concern.
therefore,
So nobody's
my question
suggesting
is-
it's
Yeah.
a bad comment necessarily.
Well-
It's a proposal for these 5 people to evaluate and figure out, is it the right
Yeah.
change?
And I guess my question was, now that Jerry has said, all these people have spent all this time at it, and they considered this, and they as a group have decided this is what they want, so that's what you're gonna get.
No, Jerry was saying that to use the word that it was done in a stealthy way isn't accurate because it was
Okay.
done openly.
Yes. Oh, okay, I didn't mean stealth that way. It was the emphasis was on letting people with less acreage more flexibility, but the result was to make it more difficult for certain people. Anyway, I appreciate the ability to talk.
Good, we're pleased. That's why we have a hearing, Amy. I mean, that's, John, you want to comment?
Yes,
He
thank
always
you.
comments on things I say.
John Sell. I have a tiny point. The language is, for rural districts, is very restrictive, and in one particular regard, it does impact us. There's a limitation of 15 degrees. 15 degrees of slope is the absolute maximum that you can build on, and that is a pretty extreme limitation.
That's not part of the
That's not
amendments,
being
though. That's not
proposed for
tonight.
change this evening, though. The steep slope.
Yeah, there are, if I may, there are two related concepts, but the degree of slope is not part of this proposal. I know that Dave Marshall, in some comments, and he may be speaking to them momentarily, offered the view that, well, it's not defined, so perhaps it means 15%, and that isn't how the section is written. There are, like I said, two separate but related uses of slope. The first use is to determine what is called the developable area. It's that adjustment in development potential. But once that's done, it's put aside. And there are references to, quote, steep slopes that have been in the subdivision regulations and in the zoning regulations without a number for multiple years. And I believe that that's the steep slopes that are intended to be used as part of this process. It's not 15%. 15% is not defined as part of this.
15%, 15 degrees.
Well, the language is 15%. It's not 15 degrees.
That only applies to the definition of developable
That's in the
area.
developable land
That's it.
definition.
Okay, John? All set? Are there any other comments? Dave?
Thank you for your time. I'm Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates. And the people that have bugged the Planning Commission for numerous times, as represented tonight, is Peg and Dick Minier. They've been very persistent. And unfortunately, they could not come to tonight's meeting. So they asked us to provide some commentary with regard to the proposals that are set forth for changes to the zoning regulations. Obviously, the biggest component that is favorable to them is the opportunity to subdivide their property where they couldn't before because of those particular limitations in the developable land definition. In this particular case, one of the things that caught our eye was the opportunity that perhaps we should be adding some more definition to the critical words within this particular change in the zoning bylaw. And the reason I'm sensitive to this is that for 16 years, I was the engineer associated with litigation on one particular project in the city of South Burlington. And it focused on definition, or the lack of definition, as far as the enforceability of specific components, both the city comprehensive plan for the city, as well as their own land use regulations. So in this particular case, you know, the devil is in the details, as they say. And what we wanted to do is make sure that we vetted through some of the components of this particular proposed change to make sure that we aren't going to get into an issue of, gee, the applicant thought one thing and the Development Review Board thought another thing, or staff thought a third thing altogether. And one thing that particular Supreme Court case, or they actually went twice on that particular project in South Burlington, was that it came back and said, to paraphrase, is that an applicant should be able to understand what they are eligible to get an approval for by reading their rules and not have to interpret what the Development Review Board would think. So bottom line is it needed to be very specific as far as what you can and can't do. So in this particular case, one thing that came up was when we, for any project now in the rural district, the rules say that you are required to have your building envelope in an area that doesn't have wetlands, doesn't have floodplains. Well, those things make sense. Can't do it anyways based on the regulations, but it also talked about the fact you can't have a building envelope have any component of a steep slope. I jumped to the conclusion that it was, we were going to use the same standards set forth for the developable lands definition, where 15% was the limitation. Well, Dean corrected me, that wasn't the case, but it's not defined at all. So what is a steep slope? Depends on who you talk to. You know, it could be the 15% number. For an engineer that's built a golf course on the side of a mountain, it could be 45% is a steep slope. So, you know, that's right there, example number one of what is acceptable, what's not. If you want to basically say that 15% is the number, but you happen to have a 10-foot by 10-foot patch in the perfect location of where a home should go, but you read it literally, you say the building envelope can't be on top of that 10-foot by 10-foot by 10-foot section that's steeper than whatever ultimately we define. So what we're looking for is the ability for the Development Review Board either to waive certain percentage or certain components of that particular steep slope. For example, if it doesn't exceed 1,000 square feet, does it make sense still to have a building envelope in a portion of the property that makes the most sense, as opposed to artificially having to push it over here because you have something that just barely does not meet the standard. So we're looking for additional definitions in a couple of different locations in order for this to basically pass the scrutiny test as far as detail. And another one, which Dean also filled in the blank on, but it's not in the proposal right now, is the definition of core forest. And
Definition of?
Core forest.
core forest.
Thank you.
Core forests and wildlife corridors.
Well, I'll focus on core forest. I'm not an expert on either one of those, but it also represents a situation where the applicant should be able to understand what that means. And right now, if it's not defined, and I can't give them a good answer, although Gail, you would be able to tell me what it is, right? Yeah. And Dean filled in the blank for me. But just going to point that we think this one just needs a little bit more detail to basically get us to that particular point of making sure that everybody understands what the expectations are when an applicant comes in, either to meet with staff or to basically put an application before the board, so that we don't get into these litigious situations of interpretation. So we want to basically just make sure that we've got those T's crossed and I's put into place so that when an applicant comes in and presents their proposal, that 90% of the time, they're headed in the right direction to begin with. And it's done that way by basically laying out the rules in a way that can't be misinterpreted, I guess, is my overall story for that.
I need to get queued up as to where that new language is regarding slope.
It's in section C2, 6C2 of 1930.3. Dave, a couple questions. Did you bring these additional changes up at the Planning Commission level?
No, in fact, I wasn't aware of this until Friday when the Miniers called. So that's our apologies for obviously the late nature. But yes, it would have been a wonderful time to appear before the Planning Commission
That's
and
something
have
that,
this level of discussion.
given the involvement that the property owners have had,
I'm sorry, Jamie.
given the involvement that they've had with the commission,
I can't speak for them. I didn't have that level of discussion.
so
They
were you
said,
just
"Can we go
retained to?
I'm sorry?
Were you just retained by them?
Yes, for this particular meeting.
Okay.
Back in 2012, we were asked to assist them with a proposed subdivision
Right.
of their property when the issues of developable lands came up. And
Yep.
since then, they've been trying to figure out a way ever since.
Are the only two changes you're recommending are steep slope and core forest?
So I think the
Do you have
steep...
other, and are they written in a written form?
We did share some comments with both Dean as well as
Jason?
No, I'm sorry, with Lee.
Oh,
Both
okay.
Dean and Lee got copied as far as our emails. So there is some written component. I think the steep slope is really the slippery slope, sorry, couldn't help myself, in which, depending on how you set that up, creates secondary levels of issue going beyond that, as far as, again, building envelopes, where they should be cited, what type of exceptions can be put into the play as far as that's concerned. And I'll throw out one example Jerry, as far as my interpretation, if the 15% number had been used as a defining a steep slope. Right now, you can mow your lawn on slopes up to 25% very easily, very readily. But 15% is, if 15% were the standard, then you couldn't put a building envelope on your own lawn. It doesn't make sense. I don't know if putting it on your lawn is the right place, but if you own 10 acres of lawn or 10.1 acres of lawn that happen to have slopes greater than 15%, then outside of these particular changes, you could never subdivide your land. However, with these particular changes, the opportunity is now there, but if your lawn happens to be over 15%, if that were the number that were used by a person, and I jumped to that conclusion, so, lacking a definition, why wouldn't somebody else do that? Bottom line is you couldn't subdivide 10 acres of lawn area in something that's mowed, easily mowed. I mean, we think of steep slopes, we try to say, well, why do we want to avoid steep slopes? It's because of erosion issues or because they're associated with high ridge lines. Why are we scared of steep slopes? Once we understand those particular answers, then we can go and start defining what is a steep slope.
What are you recommending, Dave, as a steep slope? What is your standard?
I did respond to Dean probably after he already was in your meeting tonight. You did. So for the engineer, who's not afraid to solve the world's problems, the steep slope was, I wouldn't want to fall down that slope. So that's anywhere from a 2-on-1 slope to a 1-on-1 slope. When you look down and say, boy, I don't want to fall down that, that's a steep slope to me.
And it certainly depends on who you ask.
And there you go. So my point is that if we could just take a little bit more time to fill in those blanks, I think we will all be in a better position to basically allow this to move forward as far as...
You're not making a recommendation of a figure, you're simply asking that it be revisited.
That's correct.
A fair summary?
Yeah, and we would be happy now that, unfortunately, at the last minute, we're involved in the process, but, we would be very much... I would like to fill in the blanks just because it's very sensitive to my heart when I see a rule that a proposed rule or an existing rule that leaves a lot open to interpretation. And the Supreme Court was pretty clear in the fact that we need good detail in our regulations in order for them to be enforceable.
Thanks, Dave. Josh?
Is there a section in bylaws in general, it doesn't seem like in what we have here, that has a list of definitions for different things?
Yes, there are, but there are no proposed amendments as part of this change. But yes, there's a chapter of definitions at the end of the zoning regs, but sometimes they're also included in a particular section. So the definition can be either place. I just wanted to address a couple of things. First, just to clarify David's late arrival, relatively speaking, the Miniers have been contacted regularly throughout the process. So even though David got the email today because their son was not able to represent them, and he must have read the bylaws and they hadn't read it as closely, they have been informed throughout the last year regularly. Secondly, I should say that I totally understand the void for vagueness principle that's identified by the JAM golf decision. We have to take that into account. There are some things about the proposal that I think do have an influence on some of David's comments. And the key ones are the use of the word shall versus the word should. And in cases where the word should is coupled with a undefined term, the significance is vastly reduced because should is not mandatory. However, as you can see, if you look at here, there are a couple of places at least where the proposal would change shoulds to shalls. So that is important, and those are probably the places you need to focus the most. As I said, however, the reference to steep slopes has been in the regs. The significance of it is that it would be a change from should to shall. And the reference is really to sensitive areas, such as if we're talking about a definition that we need to pin down, it's probably the definition of sensitive areas. Because even if we have a numerical definition of steep slopes, then the next question will be, well, then what are floodplains and what are wetlands? And then what are sensitive areas? So I think we do need to keep
the appropriate questions in mind.
But how does that deal with Dave's concerns about, I guess, legal precedent that says that somebody needs to know what those are if they're going to read the, rather than understand rather than interpret what that is? I mean, it doesn't seem like an unreasonable concept.
Wanting the number, particularly if you're a planner or an engineer, it's not unexpected. It's easy and it's convenient to have a number. It's tougher as a policy setter, like the members of the Planning Commission, sometimes to agree on what that number should be. I mean, David wasn't able, when I contacted him, to say a number. We know he doesn't want to fall down it. I wouldn't want to fall down it. But the issues that are behind why we want to regulate development on steep slopes are pretty long established. This is an American Society of Planning Officials publication from, I think 1972 or 5. I mean, these issues have been around. Why we want to avoid building on steep slopes. I'm sorry if he didn't take that class. You missed that lecture by Professor so-and-so. We can go into it, but I agree, definitions are helpful. I don't know if Jason, as the chair of the Planning Commission, has any reaction to it, but certainly if the decision of this board is to investigate definitions or task the Planning Commission, we'll investigate definitions. There's no argument against them, except maybe on the part of some who would say, well, this is really something we'd prefer be context-driven. And some people would rather have it be context-driven, but attorneys and engineers who go to legal lectures as part of their continuing education credits are going to hear the speakers say, yeah, you gotta be able to know in advance, or you should be able to know.
And that's exactly the balance. And this is almost every deliberation that we had on that particular topic got into those types of discussions, which is how we ended up where we did because of that. I wish there was a silver bullet. I wish there was just an easy way to address this stuff, but yeah.
I mean, it seems to me, based on both your comments here, that whole concept of being able to deal with issues in context is certainly one that, yes, does provide a certain degree of interpretation, but on the other hand, that's what all these groups, and especially the DRB, is there to do, is to make those decisions based. So I can see both sides of that argument being very realistic.
If you looked at the bylaw, there are at least 50 other examples of looking at a word and suggesting that it could be ambiguous, right? In isolation, so
it's a very challenging time for all municipalities.
Yeah,
live
I mean,
in
I get
Charlotte,
the.
We're assisting the Planning Commission with trying to fill in all those blanks because the language before left a lot of discretion to the DRB specifically because of every site is different. And trying to nail down a perfect answer for every situation is very difficult without creating regulations that are this thick. So it is a challenge, no doubt about it. And that's unfortunately what we are all tasked with now as far as how to basically create something that meets the standard.
And this would be, I guess, to Jason or Dean, in that particular subsection C2, the language added in that last sentence are two things, and core forests, and then the word should is stricken and replaced with shall. Why did the commission feel it should use the word shall there? Because to me, that is problematic if
It's a game
there's-
changer.
Yeah.
I mean, Dean sent it very well, where should gives everybody flexibility.
Well-
The shall is basically mandatory.
Well, this particular sentence has a should component and a shall component. So I'm wondering what made sensitive areas a shall and open fields and core forests a should.
A lot of it had to do to give deference to protection of natural resources and to be able to enforce it, because if that said should, then wetlands and floodplains would be governed by state regs, but the the slopes wouldn't, and there were scenarios where that was important.
And steep slopes don't really seem to me to be sensitive areas.
Really?
Depending.
I
Yeah.
think they are.
Yeah, it really depends.
I mean, that's the whole discussion around developable area is,
And
Well,
it's-
I mean
I mean-
sensitive from an environmental point of view, which is the gist I'm getting from this grouping, wetlands, floodplains.
No, I think it
I
can
know,
be.
I think,
A lot
I
of-
think they are very sensitive. You don't want development on top of steep slopes that's going to contribute to
And if memory serves,
additional stormwater
Okay.
runoff and,
I was
Man.
just going to say, a lot of it had to do with stormwater, and this is also within the context of the big stormwater bills that are coming for Shelburne and everybody else.
Understood, thank you.
Yeah.
Susan?
Susan Meganberg. Another thing about steep slopes, especially around us, is they sometimes have the rock outcroppings, which are denning habitat for foxes, bobcats, wildlife. And I just wanted to address the issue of core forest definition. Sean McFadden, who's on our Natural Resources Committee, created the map that Dean referred to that's in the natural resources section of the town plan. And he can almost certainly provide a definition of core forest because he had to designate
Yeah, I
what
don't
it is
have
on
a
the-
problem with core forest. It's
the-
the steep slope, which just got defined by Jason and Jamie for me, but not by Dave, who was talking about it being my lawn. So, right? So, I mean,
Right.
there's a,
But developing on steep slopes from an environmental perspective greatly has the potential to greatly increase.
no, I understand that, yeah,
Erosion
yeah. But I was
and
thinking
degrade
about it in
habitat.
terms of a slope on my lawn that I could mow.
Okay.
Right? So, but, yeah, and not being a builder, I would never contemplate building a structure on a slope with outcropping, so I'm now educated. But I think anybody going forward who wants to develop should get the minutes of this meeting, correct? For some legislative perspective on what the Planning Commission and those who were involved in this amendment were thinking about when they added the word shall not include sensitive areas such as steep slopes. And then they would know that if it's a 15% angle on which one would typically have a lawn, then maybe not a problem. But if it's an outcropping where it's habitat or will create, add to stormwater runoff, then they
but
have
that's, I
more
mean, isn't that up to
perspective.
the applicant in the conditional use review is to put forward, you know, in
Sure,
our
yeah.
opinion, it's a 8% slope and the definition in this section says 15%. So therefore, I mean, you're making your case to the board. You do this all day long. So this is not news to you, but for the general public. I mean, we have common sense folks sitting on the DRB who need to interpret things all the time, even though in some cases they don't want to. I get that they'd much prefer to see a very black and white world, but the reality of the bylaw is they do have to interpret.
And they
at
would
the
have to
margins.
interpret the steep slope
They
as
do.
a sensitive area. In other words, if it's a type of slope that's not creating some problem as far as being sensitive to the environment, then you should be okay, I would think.
I think another way of looking at this I can offer is, if it helps from my background, both writing and enforcing regulations, is sort of these kinds of standards, or these, fall into two categories. Are you going to develop engineering standards, which is here's a number that says what the slope is, versus a operational standard which says this is what we want to achieve. This is the kinds of things, and I think that's where the differences are here, are we talking about an engineering standard or an operational standard? And one's a whole heck of a lot easier to enforce than the other, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have possibilities to have both of those kinds of available when appropriate.
I'm going to make a suggestion at this point, being among everybody perhaps the most coming from behind learner on this. It seems to me, departing from Mary's suggestion about the benefit of a legislative appendix of some kind, a record that won't necessarily take the form of the regulation, but does inform it in terms of intent and expectation. It seems to me this is a case where we should develop such a thing. And to pen any decision approving this until we've done that, perhaps by our next meeting. And in that process, come to some conclusions about how much change, if any, should be made in the regulation itself versus the rationale for it. That's sort of, Amy, something that I think you were identifying in the case, in the other case as well. If the rationale is not satisfactory, it would probably be, however, much better if we had one stated and easy to read and understandable. That seems to me. And it seems to me in this case as well, because I gather there may be other concerns that are being raised. In this case, if the rest of the board agrees, we'd rely on those of you who have other concerns to communicate to them to us, promptly. And I think the question might be amongst ourselves as to whether a legislative record would do in every case, or whether there should be a change in the proposed reg, and that we would come back in 2 weeks and account for ourselves in that manner. Does that seem an agreeable?
I guess I'm not following what you mean by legislative record, because
Well,
that doesn't matter in the context of
No,
the
it
DRB
wouldn't.
hearing.
It wouldn't have the strength of
Right.
regulation,
I
but it
mean-
would certainly answer some questions about rationale and intent, which a regulation can't. A regulation can't easily give a rationale for the regulation. It gives the regulation, and then you do some
Right.
guesswork as to what the
But
rationale was.
That's what
These-
the bylaw change
Yeah.
report's for,
Yeah.
is to
that's-
provide the rationale.
Yeah, and
So if that's,
in this case, I
maybe
don't
your
think.
suggestion is that the report itself needs to be,
Exactly. I think it needs to be strengthened to the degree that we've had these questions. John?
I think that that's a very sensible suggestion. I would just remark that the 15 should not be regarded, the language should not be even mentioned, because if you put it down on paper, it becomes the defensible number, and bureaucracies will always fight to hold it. And in our case, it would interfere with our plans for an enormous salt storage facility.
that's been in the bylaw for a long time, and it's not,
We've always appreciated your humor, John, and we would be much the less without it. No, but I think the other problem that strikes me tonight is that we're talking apparently about two individual cases. I'm not familiar with the one you're representing, Dave. I'm more understanding perhaps of the SARS, but it seems to me there may be others than just two. And in this case, my sense would be that the rationale is provided, is strengthened, and addresses these specifics. I would think we could, with profit, take time for a couple of weeks and come back with a stronger document. Gail?
I was just going to say that I think to a very large extent, the rationale is defined a bit in the Newtown plan, which is asking to protect all of those natural areas. And so what we actually perhaps need is a better definition, as opposed to the rationale, and maybe the rationale can be enhanced by those definitions.
It certainly would be strengthened by some more definitive statement. It may be that the definitive statement's not captured easily here, as we've heard a good deal of discussion. We have an unusual benefit in the former chairs of both the DRB and the Planning Commission amongst ourselves. So I think all of you can appreciate the degree of expertise we'd apply to this. It's probably good to put us to work for 2 weeks and let us come back and with a product that we're all satisfied with. Give some of us the chance to catch up, which certainly I need, and come back outside of a hearing just to have a discussion on the basis of to approve or not approve our next meeting. Jason, you got a sense?
Yeah, I think from a scheduling standpoint, on the planning commission anyway, if we needed to review anything, we're probably looking at April, right? I mean,
In terms of
potentially-
implementation?
Potentially, yeah. Just mostly because we've been going through some scheduling and quorum, and I'm actually gone for March. So it would probably be delayed a bit.
Can we adjourn the hearing and hold it open?
You can recess it to any date certain you wish, yes.
Okay.
Well, we could do that too. Is that acceptable?
I'm okay with it. I mean, my view is they've put a lot of time into this, and the homeowners had an opportunity to raise this at the planning commission level. So I feel like we have other priorities to get after, but if the board wants to spend time trying to define the rationale for this, then so be it.
Yeah, but, I think the purpose of having public hearings is for people, the public, to make comments. And I'd hate to be in a situation where people would get the impression that, oh, you're having a public hearing, but they're not going to listen to anything we say.
I see like the public hearing is a little bit different. Like that might be, hey, we went to the planning commission meetings, we've said this, but I don't feel like this voice is being heard. And that'd be like another.
And that's, yeah, I don't have a problem with that either.
And
But I think I don't think you can take the position that we've done all this work, we've gone this far, and that someone who just found out about something and wants to bring it up, I think we need to address that seriously.
Thank you for your time. I'm Paul Irish, and you mentioned there were two scenarios. I'd like to present a third and request that you take action on this. I have a situation that does both involve steep slopes and an area that has been probably the only open area left on the east side of the town. It's a little under 15 acres. And it has some places that are probably bobcat habitat, and it has places that, although steep, do not contribute to water runoff because there's forest and there's lands. But I can't make any adjustment in my property because of the current language in the regulations. And postponing parts of this will just mean that I'll be put out another, we haven't had any development on the land in 150 years. So, it'd be nice to be able to move forward. I understand that this doesn't relate specifically to C2, but if there is a way to think about maybe parsing it out, or perhaps looking at improving the language at a subsequent reading the bylaws or through the planning commission time, I'd hesitate to be postponed another 3 or 4 months.
That's my frustration with bringing it up at the 11th hour.
Thank you.
I recognize our process is very measured, but I don't think we're in the years category quite yet. I think the idea that I've suggested is that we continue this at the next meeting, which is 2 weeks, and iron out what seem to be legitimate questions being introduced, however much at the 11th hour they're being introduced. As Josh indicated, that's what a hearing is for. And if it's as simple a matter as just bringing a number of us up to speed on what the rationale is and how it relates to the definitions, and is that, does that have strength of purpose, that relationship, enough that we're comfortable with it and we can address any further questions? Or do we think that the rationale ought to be strengthened itself? That's a pretty simple task, which we've not had the opportunity to it's not something we've had the opportunity to do until you hear the responses in public hearing.
Can I offer a
Sir.
different view, Mr. Chair? I mean, I realize we've gone beyond our allotted time on this, but it is early. I guess we've.
only 2 other
I-
entries.
We have
I
a
guess we
bonus
forgot-
hour.
yeah. I'm satisfied based on the discussion we had, which to me is how our little lovely democracy works in Shelburne, that I now better understand based on the clarification that I've gotten from the former chair, from Dean, from the present chair, that section of the language. And I'll point out that section of the language that we've been talking about isn't new. It's been there. And so I'm not even sure if it's appropriate for us to start whacking at it in the next 2 weeks. It's really, the process should really start with the commission. So in my view, other than changing the word from should to shall, which is an important distinction but doesn't alter the definitional section, I'm satisfied that the qualifier, sensitive areas, prior to the words wetland, floodplain, and steep slope, it suffices to give enough information. Sorry, Dave, I disagree with you. Suffices to give the applicant enough information and a hook to hang his or her hat on to say, this is not a lawn, this is, or this is a lawn, rather than, and then you would have Gail showing up saying, no, it's a fox habitat. So I probably shouldn't use actual people. But, we've all been through the process, at least certainly I have. And I think there's enough there. I mean, it hasn't been a problem so far. Or has it in this town with that language?
I'll just, one
I don't
last
think it's
note.
been a problem.
The nature of those words is exactly what the Supreme Court said the city of South Burlington did not have enough definition on. So.
Those very words? Or?
Yes, exactly.
Oh.
They said sensitive areas, these particular sensitive areas shouldn't be touched. They said, what are sensitive areas? So I'm not saying you can't pass this tonight, but I'm also trying to just advise you that the law of the land is much different than it has been for the past 50 years when it comes to planning and zoning. Mm-hmm. That if you want to avoid issues of discussions like this, then it's time to put a little bit more hard work into just defining what those particular terms are. If we do that, then you basically have avoided a situation that two people don't agree. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, shouldn't that then be something that gets brought to the attention of the planning commission by groups and asked to be changed at a planning commission meeting rather than at a select board meeting when it's not part of an
Yeah, when
amendment?
it's not in front of us, yeah.
So can we just, as a select board, agree or think about passing this tonight, or closing the hearing and passing this tonight, and then putting it to the planning commission, a charge to revisit this within the next, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to satisfy both things.
Yeah.
Is that acceptable, Jason?
It certainly is. I couldn't put a timeline on it or anything because of the, there has been a lot of circular debate around definitions, which again is how we landed with this conclusion in the first place. But yeah, totally open and would welcome people to come in and partake in that discussion.
Dave, I guess Dean is aware of the case that you reference, and maybe,
It's not a new case.
right,
Yeah.
so.
And that case actually drove a lot of the reasons
Right.
why we did what we did.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a great discussion. I really appreciate everybody who came, so. I would move to close the hearing.
Second.
Mary moves and Colleen seconds a motion to close the hearing. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay? Nay. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Moved by Mary,
Second.
seconded by Colleen. Discussion.
Yeah, I would think that.
We were doing both.
Right, but I think, I'm not sure what the best way of incorporating Colleen's suggestion as a directive to the planning commission as part of the approval of this or as a separate?
I think it could just be sense of the board. I don't think we have to have a motion, I move to authorize the planning commission to, I think you get the sense of where we're going, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that doesn't really address the issue in a straightforward way. It's, my sense is that when you say, yeah, well, you think you should do that, well, that might happen in 5 years. So I would be more comfortable in voting to approve this if we also had some sort of meat as saying, yes, in a broader sense, yes, we approve this, but in order for these to be effective, we think these things need to be done.
How about when the next time the planning commission comes before the select board is, like our yearly meeting? And we just ask for an update.
I mean, I'd be comfortable, Josh, as a direction to the town manager. I think that's the most appropriate step here. The town manager's listened and taken in all of this and could recommend to us steps in terms of approaching the commission itself, maybe writing this up with, as a separate paragraph, the gist of our concerns, and communicating it on. Fortunately, Jason's here and Dean's here, and we have all the, all the major players. But
so that,
yeah,
again, and this might come up. So does that mean that gets put into the town manager's, what's it called, roles and responsibilities?
Well, there are a lot of things that we ask him and direct him to do that
we
aren't
just-
showing
I
up
just
in
saw
roles
the
and
chair of the planning
responsibilities.
It's really up to the applicant to attend the next planning commission meeting and put it on their agenda, and they'll consider it at the right time. The chair sets the agenda, he's here.
Yeah, and if I may, David, when I was hearing your comments, that where this is going is exactly what I was thinking is an ideal situation, given that there are various properties that are waiting for this, is to go ahead and move forward, but then have the parties come and say, all right, we would like these definitions tightened up, because this will then apply to future cases that we don't want to drag on. And that would certainly force that conversation. And I know that, even just hearing this conversation, and we've discussed this internally as well, there are a lot of definitions that it would be great to have. It's a matter of where you spend time and what the priorities are. So really, we just need this process to be driven by people coming to meetings.
Are you comfortable doing that, Dave, even if you don't have a portfolio? Are you comfortable representing the great number of potential applicants that you do? Are you comfortable going to the planning commission and make some general suggestions as you did tonight?
Yes, absolutely. We're always here to help, as far as try to help anyhow. The other side of the coin is that without the definitions, all applicants will come forward with their own idea of what those things are. So that being the background, there's going to be a point in time when we are going to be dealing with some more discussions as far as what a steep slope is. So with that being the background, and with the understanding of Mr. Irish's goal of moving forward, and obviously the Miniers would love to move forward. They've been waiting many, many years for this opportunity. So this is great that the Planning Commission has found a tool to allow it to move forward. I think this is just as an engineer who's spent a lot of time dealing with a particular project and other projects that either benefited or didn't benefit from certain definitions, that ultimately, as every regulation comes before you, one of the goals is to tighten them up. Or have them as tight as possible, so that you don't have a situation that comes back in a litigious way. So that being the background, it's just a more cautionary measure for you. And with that being the background, we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Any further comment? Any other discussion? We have a motion?
No, it's already.
Motion in front of us?
To approve both proposals simultaneously? Okay.
Yep.
It was already on the floor.
Ready for a vote.
Those please approving signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. It's unanimous. Thank you. We thank everybody involved. Thank you, Dave, Amy, and John.
We're almost caught up.
Gail, Susan.
Paul.
Pretty much.
Dean, thank you. Paul, thank you very much. The next item is town manager goals and objectives, review and ratify. These have been presented to you with some changes, largely in the sense of, there's something,
No, she just,
Nope, we're good.
yeah,
all set?
all good.
Well, I just want to bring up one point which sort of fits in what I was saying before. Last meeting, we had the discussion about yeah, sometimes my brain doesn't.
Facility requirements and
That,
potential borrowing.
Yeah, right. And I think it was stated in the minutes, which I think states it again, that the minutes from the 29th, if I have it, that we needed pursue a broader analysis in the next 6 months of the costs and needs at all town facilities, stormwater, wastewater, and deferred maintenance, and the like. And so we all agreed that was necessary, and we would delegate it to the town manager to do that. And I'm not sure where in these things that would appear.
Good question. I think you'll find it, and there were copies available if anyone was interested in seeing this. I think you'll find it under Goal 6, Objective Number 3. There's a paragraph directing me to prepare by July 1 a facilities management initiative that I think gets right to the heart of that matter.
Give me that again. I did, because
Sure. Goal 6,
Oh, goal
Objective
six.
Number 3.
Number
Thank you.
3.
Which speaks to my responsibility to provide a facilities management initiative featuring arrangements for an audit of town facility physical conditions in determining priority facility maintenance needs. So I think that's...
Well, I think it needs to be broader than that. One, I think the time frame we need to be looking at is probably up to 10 years. And it's not just facility maintenance. It's what other developmental issues need to be addressed. And I look at this from a perspective of saying, okay, after that's done, and we have a better understanding of what needs to be done, or what are our obligations going to be in 10 years, and how that's going to affect the property tax rate, what our debt position is. People need to know these kinds of things in the distance of saying, okay, do I want to vote for, this or that, knowing what that's going to increase. So I think it's not just facility maintenance per se, it's what are all of the big ticket items. I mean, obviously some are in the CIP, but a lot of them aren't. And so all I'm looking for is some mechanism to allow the public to really understand in a broader sense, a broader strategic sense of what what it really means when they're voting on whatever proposal might come to fore.
Yeah, my sense of it, Josh, is that you've, I think, correctly identified a connection that we should be making between the CIP, not just current budget or near-term budget, and we do that 2 and 3 years out routinely. And as I understood your point, we need to extend our appreciation of capital investment to a longer period of time, perhaps 10 years, basing it on, importantly, which has been specified here, an audited understanding of what needs to be done to our facilities.
Right.
Because I think I understood most of your concern to have to do with facilities, not so much reserves or soft development, call it.
No.
So the question is, when you talk about needed maintenance on this building, replacing a roof, is that a 2, a 7, a 9-year? As we're debating a $100,000 item next fall, where does that, how long is the shadow? You know, how much of a shadow does this 100, which has to be done someday, cast? And some means, even graphic means of
addressing it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you brought it, even I had to talk about the need for our wastewater facilities, and that fits within that 10-year cycle. That's going to be a big chunk of change.
Sure.
And so you can't make a decision this year without recognizing, okay, well, there's going to have to be a bond for that too, and how's that going to affect things?
So when Lee suggested that perhaps this had been accounted for already, I agree with you. I think the larger part is an audit, a systematic study, which was, I think, underlined your whole point, that we need a systematic study of what we've got and in what shape is it in, and which we don't have. So this was intended to create an initiative whereby he addresses that and establishes the process of that study, sees it to some conclusion, and it was meant in time, frankly, to coordinate with the CIP. I think the difference that you've pointed out, or the further need that you've pointed out, and I quite agree, is to make sure there's a connection between those two, a hard and fast connection, deserving of its own time some night. And I think we could probably make that change easily enough in these goals, objectives.
That sounds reasonable.
Hope that we could approve these and move on with the understanding that you've got two different items that show up in two different places. Your point was they need to be connected more directly and routinely. And I think
and in a way, in a way that the public really can understand what these things mean. I mean, reading the CIP is not is not something that people are going to. What does this mean?
It has to be a visual summary.
No, it has to be a graphic, just like the charts of the indebtedness, which are very communicative. No question about it. We extend it. It shows the looming borrowing that we're going to have to deal with, whether stormwater or building replacement or any other item. And in a way, we're always a little victimized by the fact that towns operate on one-year basis.
Which is
sometimes an influence that you've got to fight back against. It's annual funding always. And you can easily slide into annual annual planning. So I think you made a good point, and I do think we can account for it, Josh, in these goals and objectives.
Okay. I mean, it just goes back to the thing is that having to make year-to-year decisions benefits by having a longer-term strategic plan and understanding of where you want to be.
I think your legacy is going to be, in some months, something like a strategic plan, and
that'd be nice.
And we will be sure to invite you that night to take credit.
Can I ask a question about the dates on this? They seem awfully ambitious.
That's what I was suggesting too.
It gives him 6 months to do really what is at least a year's worth of work, in my opinion.
I don't think so at all. I think he's got plenty of time to do it.
I have a couple radical suggestions too, an attempt to focus our town manager, not that he's not focused, but with respect to this work product, I think I would suggest cutting out goal 3 completely. I think it's important, of course, but I think cutting out goal 5 is something that will happen naturally and already has. And I'd much prefer to focus in on 3 or 4 key goals that we enhance, however, to your point about how do we build in that comment that you just made, make sure the dates are realistic and achievable.
Could we just, would it be easier to prioritize them in a way to say that, or reorder them and saying, these are the things we'd like to have done, but we recognize that there are priorities in getting them all done?
I'm trying to keep it manageable.
Yeah.
That's all. And in fairness to,
I agree.
it's a long list, and I think some of this will just happen offline, and already does. So
Right.
I don't feel like responsiveness and public outreach are something that we need to
No, not any problem.
articulate in here.
You?
It's something I try to do as a
Yeah,
matter,
I mean,
matter
it
of
just
course.
feels like,
They're hard to measure.
I mean, some
Yeah.
of these will happen concurrently. For example, the staffing issue, I'm going to bring a proposal to you next meeting. That will need to happen concurrent with some other work on stormwater and other matters. So I appreciate the concern. It is an ambitious set of goals and objectives. I think I've shown I'm not afraid of hard work, but I would like to make sure that we agree that on whatever this becomes, that it is indeed reasonable and manageable. But again, some of these will happen concurrently by nature of the issues. So I think it's hard to say this one's more important than that one, because inevitably,
yeah, I'm less concerned
I think
about
we're saying they're all
prioritizing them.
important.
I just think there are too many,
Yeah.
frankly.
I agree with Jamie.
I think a couple of the dates should be adjusted, as Mary alluded to. Beyond that, I thank the chair for putting the time in to develop these and work with you.
Team effort as always.
Yeah, no, I don't have any problem with 3 or 5.
Good.
That's fine.
They were difficult to,
I mean,
they were announced priorities by us in the last retreat, and, but they're very hard to measure, and,
And I think that's the important thing, is how do you
Yes.
measure
yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see the struggle under, particularly under 5. I mean, you can't maintain a log of who called and
Well,
certainly of
that's
who
the-
didn't call. I mean, it's a really difficult. And I think in that case, anecdotal, the idea, of course, is that this is how we will evaluate Lee's performance. And at that point, I think the anecdotal record may suffice, yeah.
Yeah. It also doesn't feel like a big goal to me. It feels
Yeah.
a little like micromanaging.
Yeah.
I'd just rather see the big initiatives out there that
Gotcha, I don't have any problem with
we're
that.
asking him to make progress against on the town's behalf.
And I'd like to propose, I don't have a problem with the February 26th date, because it sounds like you're already ready for that. But the other ones, I'd like to move it all back so that we actually, in my view, I think it would be easier for tracking purposes if we just did our first meeting after Labor Day, because it seems to me that's when we head into busy time in the fall, when you start planning, getting reports and start planning the budget. Maybe that's a little too far out, but I'd like to just revisit it at the first meeting after Labor Day and see where we are with all of these. Just seems to me to be, keep track of the different dates. There's 5 or 6 different dates here. It's a little
There's quite a few.
challenging for all of us.
I
So you're
don't
saying
disagree,
like
Mary, but
Goal
the idea
6?
was to distribute the work.
Yeah, but
So
I
the
think,
idea was to make
Lee will
sure
distribute it
it
as
wasn't
he
all.
can,
No,
right?
that's true too.
Does that make it easier or harder, Lee, for you?
Was your question to not have specific dates within this, or
Make
that we
one
would revisit the
general
whole
due date.
document?
You not have specific dates within it, and then first meeting after Labor Day, we say, okay, here are the
Where'd
goals,
we
where
go?
are we? Lee, so I don't have a problem with the February 26th, because it sounds like you're ready to report to us at that meeting.
Yes.
But the other one, how do you feel, Colleen?
Well, the only question or comment I have is, like, for example, like goal 6, and there's 3 objectives, and they're spaced a month apart. So I wouldn't want to get this, like, the
All
initiative.
in one meeting.
Right, I wouldn't want to get them all
True.
at
Good
once,
point.
and I wouldn't want to get them all in September because,
Yeah.
like you said, September, we're already gearing up for budget. I'd rather start working on these things over the summer,
Good point.
and so that we have them kind of more
Staggered.
fleshed out when we go into budget season versus kind of hearing them for the first time.
Good point.
Yeah, that was sort of the idea that the board would be more comfortable reacting to them separately
One at-
rather
one
than
at
in
a
a
time.
bunch. And
But I have a feeling that each one of these is going to spark a little avalanche of more work for Lee. So I do wonder if maybe we get there and we end up having to extend some of these, but.
Yeah, I'm less concerned about the dates.
All right.
I
Fair
feel
enough.
like you, I don't, as long as you
I will
allocate
certainly-
the workflow for the board, which you do, right? So-
Right. I mean, I will certainly, with or without specific dates, I'll certainly be reporting back and, working with the chairs on agendas and keeping us all apprised of progress. And some of these are going to require some incremental work at our meetings.
Yeah.
For example, the stormwater piece.
And there'll be points of time in which we make adjustments.
Some may need to be revisited.
And we
It's not hard to
reduce,
pass,
we,
it's more of a guide.
we knock something out because something has occurred, or there's a new state law, or whatever. So it's recognized that there are going to be influences on this that will have us make changes, so long as they're clear, fair, and objective for Lee in terms of evaluation
Right.
terms.
Okay.
So how about this? Could we ask you and Lee
Yeah.
to fine tune that
We drop 3, drop
at goal
5.
6, objective 3, per Josh's comment,
Yeah,
to
I'd be happy to do
incorporate
that. Yeah.
and then maybe put it back in front of us for final, okay, since this needs to be incorporated in the contract.
Yeah.
Is that fair? And you guys should feel free to do whatever you want with the dates. I mean, I don't,
And bring this back for the next meeting.
I think
so
as
we
long
can,
as the board
lock it
checks in quarterly on progress, something,
I think that's a great
there's some
idea.
regular
That's a
cadence,
great
then
idea.
the dates don't matter so much as progress against each goal.
And if you're gonna put in dates, this was just like a little odd, almost just housekeeping more than anything else, is that objective 1 was due in June, but objective 2 was due in May, and 3 was due in July. So it was like out of order. Are we going May, June, July, or is it objective 1, 2, 3 is a priority?
I had a reason for that, and I knew somebody would ask, but I'd forgotten
Either
why.
way.
You forgot.
We'll sit down and take a look at that.
Yeah, take a
Thank
look
you.
at it.
It made sense at the time, Colleen, but I don't
fair
remember.
enough.
But
We
yeah.
can give one more review and sign off on
Yeah, I
it
think
at the
that'd be
next
great.
meting, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
Off and
Okay,
running,
is
which
that
you
okay
already
with
are.
everybody?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Okay, 29, thank you. The next item is a proposed grant application for Pearson Library, and this is an authorization.
Yes, this is, the library director, Kevin Onrath, would like to apply for a $50,000 grant. There is no local match to it,
Yay.
and he's hoping that you would authorize him to pursue that. It's through a federal source. It's an online application due in the very near future.
I move to authorize Kevin Onrath as the library director of the Pearson Library to seek, or to apply for a $50,000 grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services for a variety of digital inclusion projects as described, and I already said for $50,000.
second.
Seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving signify by saying aye, please.
Aye. Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, and that's a nice initiative.
I've gotten one of those grants.
The next item is to certify highway mileage, which is an annual V-Trans report, and it requires a
It's-
signature.
It requires all of your signatures. It's a pro forma requirement each year. And
Is
there-
that to just track whether new roads are built?
It
in a
relates
municipality?
to whether certain types of new roads are built, some of which might be eligible for,
Great.
shared
Well,
funding.
they do, and it's
You know.
going to take on some additional importance in the new permitting, the new,
Yes. There are no changes. The clerk has
remember,
certified this.
hydrologically oriented, that's where this is going to show
So-
up.
Right.
If you'd all be so kind, they don't actually give us 5 lines, but I know you can
Thank
fit
you.
your
I don't think we
signatures.
need a motion, I think by
Just sign.
signature,
Just
we're
sign
fine.
it, it's fine.
And while that's circulating, the next item is to extend terms for all existing committee, board, and commission members by 1 year. Lee, you want to introduce that?
Sure. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the town normally goes through a process late fall of asking which board members might like to seek reappointment the following spring. We go through an advertising process, interview process. With all the transitions over the past year, this is one piece of the puzzle that we simply didn't have the bandwidth for. So the suggestion here is to consider extending everyone's terms by 1 full year. It keeps the cycle on track where some board members turn over each year. And then this summer and fall, we'll get back on track with our normal process per the policy we adopted last year.
So moved.
Moved by Mary,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Colleen.
So everybody that wants to be on the boards and committees for another year.
Well,
That's what I was to do.
I haven't had a chance to check in with
Yes,
everyone, so if we did this,
Subject to
I'm sure I will
confirmation.
hear, subject to confirmation, if someone doesn't want to re-up or extend their term, we'll have time to advertise before April 1 rollover date.
Yeah, because there was definitely some committee members that verbally had said that they were not going to stay on their committees anymore. So that's why I'm.
Right. So I'm just trying to find us a way to thread the needle here in a time frame that works. And if someone says, no, I don't want to serve another year, my term's expired in April, then we'll jump on that and advertise for those.
Yeah, I'm fine with the one-year extension, subject to confirmation by you or your staff that a member doesn't elect to renew. If they
So
put their
we'll
hand up
certainly-
and say,
so
hey,
we'll
I'm not
reach
interested
out.
in serving anymore, then we
Right.
don't want to reappoint them.
Right.
yeah. And we hold on to the April 1, which I think is,
Right, so everybody goes through April 2020.
So this
Right.
would take
Right.
everybody's term, whether it's
Through,
this year,
correct.
next year, the next
Yep.
year.
April 1,
Just
2020.
pushes
With the
everything out
exception
1
of
year.
anyone
Unless
who
someone says,
confirms
no,
otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
So like Tom Little on the ethics committee.
He,
And-
my, any indication is that he will re-up,
Yeah.
if you will.
Okay.
okay.
So I move to extend the reappointment period for each member of a CBC by 1 year, as proposed by the town manager.
Second?
Second by Jamie. Do we need to add language to that effect?
Subject to confirmation
Yeah.
by those serving that they'd like to continue. Sure, we can.
Okay, let's,
Add that in if
let's do
that's-
that. That's okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely, that's friendly.
Any discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The
Nay.
ayes. Colleen voted nay.
Yes.
And just as a quick explanation for those of you who are somewhat familiar by your regular attendance, you will recall we set a policy after some extended discussion for committee appointments. And we're intending last fall to put that in place, which involved making sure that committee chairs and commission chairs were okay with candidates and so on and so forth. And as you may recall, we simply ended up last fall with too much in too little time, which the uncertainties of the permanent town manager exacerbated. So this is the final result of that. What we're trying to do is retain as much of the process as we can, respecting the fact that we are beyond our original timeline, and there's no way for us to regain it. So the expectation is that next fall, we would implement in full that policy. So, okay, next item is to convene as a liquor commission, and in which case we're going to review and approve 3 classes of liquor licenses. We will convene first, but ahead of that, this is the opportunity for any of us to identify potential conflicts and to recuse from any decision-making regarding the licensees.
Would it help if I read the list? There were several additions to it that came in the last day or two,
Yeah.
as received by
Do
the
you
clerk.
have them broken out into first, second, and outdoor, or you just have one single list?
I have a single list. In some cases, there are multiple licenses for the same entity because they
Yeah.
might sell and serve.
No, I think it would, Lee, and for you to note that Chief Noble has also vetted these.
Yes, they've all been vetted.
Right.
vetted
Is
that
there a
way.
motion to convene as the Liquor Commission?
So moved?
Mary moves.
Second.
Josh seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
So the list of all the entities we have before us this evening are Archie's Grill, Bangkok Minute Thai Cafe, Bark Eaters, Bella Luna, actually Buono Appetito doing business as Bella Luna, Champlain Lanes, Chef Lou's, Heart of the Village, Inn at Shelburne Farms, Jiffy Mart, Kinney Drugs, Quiniasca Golf Club, Shelburne Country Store, Peg and Tears, Route 7 Liquor and Deli, Shelburne Fieldhouse, Shelburne Grocery, Shelburne Meat Market, Shelburne Tap House, Village Wine and Coffee, and Waterfront Yogurt and Sandwich Company, which is at the museum.
Okay, does anyone believe themselves conflicted?
No.
No? Is there a motion to approve these licenses in bulk?
You could certainly do it all together and save an endless array of motions.
Is there
moved.
If
so
it's
moved
your
by
will.
Mary?
Second.
Seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Moved by Mary.
Second.
Seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The
So
ayes have it.
for the